Hello and welcome to the Roundtable, Roundtable number 11. This is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and I am joined by three outstanding guests who know, each of them in their little finger knows more than I will ever know in my lifetime. And so it's humbling. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. And we are going to talk about how to pick the perfect wedding dress, because this is very important. We all need to know how to pick the perfect wedding dress for our beautiful lavender wedding. But of course, we might talk about, there's some conflict going on, I think in Ukraine. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that too. Anyway, kidding aside, of course, I'm joined by History Legends. Alex, how's it going?
I'm good. You? My pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming on. Alex, as you know, runs the History Legends channel on YouTube. The link is in the description below, as well as links to Mark and to Dima and Military Summary. Alex is just an outstanding commentator on the war, on the military aspects of it. And it's just a delight to have you back on, Alex. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Mark Sleboda. Hi, Mark. How's it going?
I'm alive, Gonzalo. How are you?
I'm semi-alive, as some of you may know, and the reason I don't have my camera on right now is because I have kidney stones, and they are fucking killing me, if truth be told. I'm actually lying down with the computer on my chest because it's the only position that's comfortable. So you're going to have to forgive me. But, lucky bastards, you won't have to see my ugly face. But Mark, you'll be able to see Mark. Mark is a very prescient and very smart analyst of the foreign policy situation. He was with the U.S. Navy as a nuclear engineer. He's currently living in Moscow, where he teaches at Moscow State University, I believe, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And Mark and I have never had the chance to do a show together, but we've interacted a couple of times before. Mark, it's a real pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Dima of the Military Summary channel. Dima is this guy, look at that forehead, do you see all those brains behind that forehead? He has been following the war in such granular detail that it's been a real pleasure to follow him on his channel, which has been growing by leaps and bounds. Congratulations, Dima, and thanks for coming on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
And Dima is going to open up the show by talking about something that I unfortunately missed because I was at the doctor's and I was busy with some stuff. But apparently there's been a missile strike on Crimea. Dima, can you tell us what has happened, please? Dima, you're muted.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have shared the screen. Can you give me this possibility? Because if you see the screen.
Sure. Let me put it on. Mm-hmm. And there we go.
Yes, this situation in Ukraine, and right before this show started, we got a very important update from Crimea. Just a second. Just give me a second. I will fix the screen. Yes. So as you can see, there is an airport near New Fedorovka, this town. This town, as you can see, is located right in the middle of Crimea. It's not somewhere on the west part, not somewhere near Kherson. It's like the heart of Crimea, not far from Simferopol and Sevastopol. And today, just a few hours ago, we got more than 11 explosions. You can find this video, a picture of that explosions in internet, of course. And first, there was a lot of interesting updates. And of course, first thing we got that Ukrainians attacked this area using HIMARS, but of course they can do this only using the AKMAX rockets. And if you calculate the distance to this area, it's around 270 kilometers. Furthermore, if we're talking about the Ukrainian authorities, they immediately gave their opinion. There was like ex-head of some military authorities department in Ukraine who told that we got these rockets and now you can see that we are using them. So there was a very big explosion. Later, we got updates that people in this area were saying that they saw no rockets in the sky. So the version of the HIMARS attack was cancelled, and after that, people were talking about some commandos action or some attack of some scouts or Ukrainian commanders because this is a military airport, and believe me, the damage was and the explosions were very big, very huge. But like half an hour ago, we got a report from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. They say that wasn't any attack, any commandos or diversion. It was some kind of mistake of military staff during some things, some preparations, when maybe some airplane came with some stuff and so on, and some ammo detonated, and entire area now is destroyed to ruins. And but they announced about evacuation from this town, so maybe we will see more updates from this area in upcoming hours. But as I see, there are still possibilities that there might be some kind of diversion. And of course, if that was a diversion, we're gonna see some interesting reports in the evening, maybe even from the president of Russian Federation, from Putin, because we understand that it's a very big problem if that situation was made by the Ukrainians. If we're talking about the situation on the ground, there are not much changes on the ground, but we got a lot of interesting changes. The most important updates are coming these days from Marinka, not from Marinka, sorry, from Piesky, from this town. If you take a look at this West Sources map, you're going to see that the north part of Piesky, this one, and the northwest part of Piesky is still under Ukrainian control. But maybe you're not familiar with this area. I'll remind you that these towns like Avdiivka, this one Piesky, this Krasnogorovka, and this Marinka is the most fortified position in Ukraine. And using this position, the Ukrainians are shelling Donetsk, and they're using the distance method of mining. They're sending a lot of petal mines. If you know what's petal mines, these some kind of mines that are not killing people, but they're let's say they can cut your leg or they can cut your arm and so on. And there are a lot of casualties among civilians in this town. So that's why the Russians were forced to start their offensive operation in Avdiivka, and they were forced to crack this net. And this is the second week in a row while the Russians are trying to push, and they got and received a lot of significant success in this area. Yes, they crossed just a few kilometers, we can say, but this is the most fortified and the most powerful kilometers in entire Ukraine. And we can say if the Russians are able to crack this net, then they will be able to take the entire Ukraine very easy, because just on these square kilometers, there are around 20,000 of Ukrainian soldiers. There are just a lot of mechanized brigades and so on. So if we take a look at this map, let's return to Piesky. You see that according to this map, the Ukrainians are saying that they still control this area. But today we got report that the Russians managed to enter Pervomayskaya, this small village that is on the west side from Piesky. So and we got more and more reports that the Russians have cleared Piesky already, that they're still doing some clearing job. Maybe there are some Ukrainians who are sitting in some buildings trying to find a solution how to evacuate from this area. But anyway, the Russians entered Pervomayskaya. And this is a very important town, because if we take a look at this map, there is one important road and one important bridge in Pervomayskaya, this one. The road that across the Vodyana, this river, there's some reservoirs of water and Vodyana river. And so the Russians, of course, they need to get there from Piesky. So this is like their main direction to this area. Then they need somehow to cross this river, to establish some bridgehead on this side of the river, on this of these water reservoirs. And from this area, if you take a look at this map, you're going to see that let's calculate, like in 4-5 kilometers, there is no let's say towns or places where the Ukrainians are able to trench their positions, to fortify, or to keep the area. So that's why from this area the Russians are planning to start their movement to the north in direction of Berdichi. And if we are to take a look at Avdiivka, and on the west, on the east side, northeast side of Avdiivka, there is already a bridgehead near Verkhnytaretskaya, this town. That this town is located on the north of Donetsk, and from this area they're planning to go on the west direction, and they're planning to meet somewhere here. So we can say that the operation of cracking Avdiivka has started, but of course the projections is not so positive, we can say. And according to the sources information I got, they're saying that this operation might take up to 3 weeks. Of course, that's a lot, and the plans can be changed during this period, but for now they're moving according to the plans, and they're trying to encircle Avdiivka, the most fortified position in entire Donbas Arc operation. And if we're talking about the main front line between Seversk and Bakhmut, This is the area that located on the west from Lysychansk agglomeration. If you remember, a few weeks ago, the Russians managed to crack this net and to encircle this area. And there were a lot of losses from Ukrainian side. They left almost a lot of armored vehicles. They got a lot of losses among their infantry, among their mechanized brigades, and so on. And today, the Russians reported that they established entire control over this plant on the east side of Solidar near Knauf plant, this one. So they take this area. Furthermore, according to the report, they managed to take not just this Knauf plant, but few streets on the west side of this plant. So these streets that I'm showing you right now is also on the Russian control. So they have their position somewhere here between two rivers. And by taking this Knauf plant, now they are able, and they're doing this right now, they started their offensive operation to the south towards the small town by the name of Bakhmutskaya. And I suppose that very soon this town is going to fall, and not just because of the fact that the Russians took this Knauf plant and managed to move a little bit to the west. And now the important update we got from Bakhmut, from Artyomovsk, this town, as you can see, this is the Zelensky defense line. This is a part of Zelensky defense line, and this town is split by the Bakhmut in two parts, the west one and the east one. And a few days ago, we got report that the Russians, and to be more precise, the Wagner's group, the private military company, entered the east side of Bakhmut. And today we got the report that the Russians managed to establish control over this area, over this is champagne plant. So as far as I understand, at least they will have a very nice party in this plant if they are not able to do something more. So the Russians took the champagne plant. And as you can see from this champagne plant, the Russians are able to establish fire control over these T-1302 roads that leads to the Bakhmutskaya. So I suppose that this road is already cracked or cut by the Russians. The only way how the Ukrainians are able to support forces in Bakhmutskaya is just using fields, but it's not a very good solution. And furthermore, this road is this area that is located on the northwest part from this road is also under fire control. So these positions is under Russian control, fire control. So I suppose that very soon we're going to see the entire collapse of Bakhmutskaya, and the Russians will proceed their offensive operation towards Solidar. According to their projection, about the Russian projection, they're saying that they're planning to take Solidar like in the next 4 or 5 days. I don't think that this operation is so easy, like to take Solidar in 4 days, because we know that Ukrainians are sending more and more infantry from the north. There are a lot of defense brigade. There are a lot of, we can say, infantry brigade, and we know that one brigade can consist of 5-6 battalions. So that means that the Ukrainians have there at least 8 infantry brigades, and each of them can be up to 5,000. So I suppose that there are a lot of forces, and now the Ukrainians are moving slowly, group by group, more and more infantry to the south, trying to stop the Russian invasion in Solidar and Bakhmut. If we're talking about the south, there are still no changes. The only one update that the Russian control more territory than the West sources map is showing us, because the Russians has reached Dacha, this town on the south, and now they are controlling these.
Dima, I have a question. What is the most accurate map people can find online? Because this is live UA map, but like you said, it's not 100% accurate. Which is, according to you, the most accurate map?
That there is no most accurate map, because anyway, everybody is trying to show their progress and trying to avoid showing their if they're defeated. So we need to follow all maps we have. We need to follow this live UA map. We need to follow Russian sources map. We need to follow the map with dispositions. We need to follow even sometimes the DPA map, because he also has some information. And using all these 3 maps, we need to do our own conclusions and our own picture, and just time, and we need a little bit time for everybody to understand who is correct, because sometimes the Russian sources map is also showing us unreal picture. And for example, this situation near Izum bridgehead, because they show even till the end of the previous week that they were controlling Mazanovka and Dibrovna, these two towns, very important towns on the north of this area. By the way, the Russians are calling this area Sherwood Forest. The Ukrainians are calling this area Broken Heart. Exactly, if we're talking about these forests. And as you can see, the West source map are showing that they managed to push the Russians back. But if we're talking about the Russians, they're saying that Dovninka, at least Dovninka, is still under their control. And I suppose that...
So there's a lot of ambiguity about the different things. And so basically, this is the way that you are generating your daily summaries. Is that right? You're looking at the various sources and also Telegram channels to put together an accurate picture, or as close as accurate as possible?
Yes, as possible. And I try to use my own logic to understand where's the truth. Because, for example, I try to use, and it's very informative information from the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. They give a lot of reports, a lot of very interesting numbers, because they're not taking numbers from the sky. Because if we're talking about the Ukrainians, they're saying, let's say that today the Russians' losses is around 40,000 soldiers. Tomorrow they're saying that the Russian losses is around 41,000 soldiers without any explanation who is these 41,000 soldiers. But we're talking about the Russians, they're talking about brigades. And if they're saying, for example, if the Russians are saying that they managed that they're fighting near Kadema and Semigorye, and we know that Kadema and Semigorye is under responsibility of 72nd and 13th Mechanized Brigade. And this morning, let's say, we saw a report from the Russian Ministry of Defense that they managed to attack these brigades. And as they're saying, this brigade lost their combat capability. That means that they might be correct, because everything is logical. First, they did attack, then they storm, and then they give us report. And then we see the result on the map.
Dima,
go ahead, Alex.
So what do you think about the latest leak about Ukrainian losses? What do you think it's a fake? Do you think it's legit? What do you think happened? Because it said about 190,000 killed or wounded, plus an unknown amount of missing in action.
I suppose this number is correct. I suppose.
Why do you think so? Because, okay, it's to background for some people who haven't heard. There's been a lot of commotion all over the internet because leaked documents emerged that seem to have been leaked by the Ukraine Armed Forces, or someone there with access to these in the Ukrainian Armed Forces leaked them. They were all over Telegram and all the pro-Ukrainian channels. And Dima.
I'm planning to show the table. I'm preparing for these purposes. Yes, it will be better this thing. So of course, this is the table that I'm trying to do. I'm preparing, I'm collecting this information. This table is an open source. As you can see, a lot of people are also following this table. So I'm trying to collect information from the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation.
Let me give a précis to the audience so that they know what we're talking about. This documentation came out and it alleged that, number one, that there were 191,000 casualties in the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, it did not say how many were killed in action and how many wounded were in action. But if you take a normal 3-to-1 ratio of wounded to killed, that would mean about 47,000 killed and an additional 150-odd thousand wounded, but wounded in a way that makes them incapacitated. And insofar as the missing in action, that would be missing in action, prisoners of war or deserters. That number they did not know, but they estimated it at 50% of that 191,000 figure. So that would be approximately 95,000 men. Ergo, it would mean that 300,000 men of the Ukrainian armed forces are no longer available to the Zelensky regime to fight this war. Now, at the start of this, by the way, this 191,000, this was strictly armed forces of Ukraine. It was not border guards or police or anybody else, though I'm not clear if it was territorial defense forces.
Well, there's one thing too. There's one thing too when counting casualties historically. The problem is that if a guy gets wounded, he can go back to fight often, depending on his situation, in a couple of weeks, couple of months. But then he can be wounded again, and the question is he counted twice in that 190,000 casualties, or it's individual people? So I think this is a thing that's recurrent since World War II, whatever combat wars, is that people can be missing, deserted, and people can be deserters and then be sent back to the front. And what are they then? You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity about the number, but anyway, this overall figure of 191, Dima, in your estimation, it would be accurate?
Yes, that would be accurate. And the only thing that we need to understand that I think that desertion level is much more higher than you suppose. Much more higher. Entire regiment are leaving their position, not just like groups or soldiers, entire regiments leaving their positions. If we are talking about, let's say, Avdiivka area, or if we're talking about Artyomovsk or Bakhmut area. For example, there was a day, let's say on 4th of August, there is 3 brigades that battalions from these brigades left their position: 54th Mechanized Brigade, 56th Mechanized, and 57th and 58th Mechanized Brigades, motorized. They just left their position. And I suppose that we saw a lot of videos and a lot of reports. So, but I think that this number 1,900 includes and 90 includes this number of desertion. It's not on top of this. It's included in this one.
And Dima, where are deserters going? Do they go home, or what's happening to them? This is a thing. Do they just retreat back and talk to their officers? What happens?
Sometimes they try to talk with officers. Because they're trying to they're making video. They're sending their video to Zelensky, and they're asking him like to help them to understand what's going on. Why are we starting any offensive operation without armor, without artillery, without tank support, and so on? And they're losing a lot of soldiers. They're going back to their positions, and after that, they got into jail. Everybody who deserted got into jail in Ukraine. It's their process.
And from what I've seen in the videos, it's mostly territorial brigades that complain because they're the less well equipped. Correct.
You see, the Ukrainian army is split in 2 parts. There was a very interesting analysis I read a few days ago. The first part is consists of defense brigade, and the second one is professional army. And they have 2 different roles. The defense brigade, their main idea just to be mid-grinder on the front line, just to hold their position. Just one thing, I will share another screen for better understanding.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, while we're waiting for this, because all this granular detail is great, but we need Mark's big brain to put it together, because what the hell is happening? Because it doesn't augur well. But Dima, finish with your presentation, and then we'll bring it over to Mark. Oh,
just a few things.
Go ahead, Alex.
But from what I've read, it's the same situation that happened in 2014, 2015. It was the same thing that happened. A lot of volunteer battalions were sent to plug the gaps, while the professional army was kept in reserve and to safe. And I think it's the same thing now.
The thing is that two armies, if you take a look at, let's say, Artyomovsk, Seversk area, you see that this area we're talking about, this is just the infantry territory defense brigade, and there are a lot of forces, and their main idea to stop the Russians. And they're trying, and by the way, if you take a look at the table of or follow the Ministry of Defense Russian report, you're going to see that they're trying to hunt just the mechanized and motorized brigade. So the force that is the second type of forces is professional army. And the Russians are not trying to attack a hit with rockets the defense brigade, because it's the waste, it's just a useless waste of rockets. So they're not trying even to get them. The main losses, if you're talking about defense brigade, is on the ground, during the ground combats, during the artillery shelling and so on. And we don't have any number of these losses. We have the losses, the only losses, official losses we have from the Russian sources is the losses among the mechanized, motorized brigades, special forces, and so on, because it's professional army. And during the previous months, starting from the, let's say, 11th of July until today, the Ukrainians lost around 13,000 soldiers just with the rockets attack. Just with the rocket attacks. Yes, killed. It's losses. Maybe it's also wounded. just with the rockets attacks, and there is no number on the battle on the ground, and they're much more higher because at the battle on the ground they're unstopped. They're like always the Russians are pushing everywhere.
Dima, you want to make an estimate? I mean, what is your best estimate of what Russian and Donbass military losses are, if we're considering that 190 casualties among Kiev regime forces is realistic?
The Russian losses, I can't tell you, and to tell the truth, there is no information, so it will be a real speculation. It will be a real speculation.
Yes, that's what I'm asking for, because I know that. Yeah,
but there is some data. I think BBC Russia something they counted, and you could see approximate death, and it's just above 5,000 killed allegedly for the Russian side, but it doesn't take into account the Donbass and Luhansk. From what I counted, it's 5,000, about 5,000 Russian soldiers killed, plus a bit more than 2,000 for Donbass and Luhansk.
Yeah,
and then
I heard the same, that the BBC has been actually from almost the beginning. They've been very, very closely monitoring all social media to count up the number of killed, because of course you can't hide a dead body, right?
Exactly.
And so what's happened is that they have been counting social media. And they've been very disappointed because back in May, they counted 3,500 dead. And then in the end of June, I believe is the last time this was reported, they counted 5,000.
And
go ahead.
And the thing that's happening is that Russian losses, if I use the screen, were very high in the first few days. And then they kept decreasing, like inverse exponential. And they kept decreasing every day. So yes, they're rising, but at the rate is this decreasing.
Yeah, it's decreasing. Yeah,
and I would say that the Ukrainian losses, the rate is inverse. So like I think in April or late March it crossed. So Ukraine's had many more casualties starting there when the Russians stalled the front and used artillery. But what I wanted to say is that I estimate 5,000, a bit more, 5,000 killed for the Russian military, 2,000 for Donbass and Luhansk, and about maybe 500 to 1,000 for Wagner. So let me know, Dima, what you think. And I'm talking about killed. Yeah.
How do you know
just about the killed? Just about the killed?
Wagner.
Sorry.
No, I asked. How do you know the numbers for Wagner and for the DPR, LPR?
Well, Donetsk region releases information about their casualties. I didn't find similar information for Luhansk, but the bulk of the forces is from Donetsk. They've faced the biggest fighting up to date. So if it's correct, let me know.
I'm not a little bit agree with you, because the DPR had a lot of fights in the beginning of the special operation in Volnovakh and Mariupol, but starting as soon as Mariupol fell, LPR forces were storming Lugansk, Severodonetsk, so their casualties during that period was much more higher than the DPR, if there were.
Correct. You're correct. But what I wanted to say is that most people today, they say it's equal. The losses of Donetsk and Luhansk is approximately the same. They have a lot of wounded. This is one thing we can see, is that they have a lot more wounded compared to the killed. So for them, it's 4.5 wounded about for every death, because they're infantry, light infantry. And because of the lack of armor, they have more casualties compared to, for example, in a tank. If the tank is destroyed, everybody dies more often than not. So they have a lot of infantry. And for Wagner, it's estimates you can find online. It's very hard to find. Most often than not, people don't want to release the information, but it's just an idea depending of the total forces.
Hey, Dima, can you do me a favor? Can you move your map over to the Crimean Peninsula? Because I want to discuss the attack that happened in Crimea.
Okay, one second.
Sure. Because what happened is, there are witnesses who say that they saw no rockets. And that seems reasonable, because also I would think that if they had rockets that had 300-kilometer range, they would have hit the Kerch Bridge as opposed to this airfield, which would seem a reasonable guess. And so the Russians are saying that, no, it was some sort of accident. I can't seem to put it on the screen. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Yeah, and the Russians are saying that it was an explosion. This reminds me a little bit of the Moskva incident, where they said it was some fire on board, but they didn't say that it was a missile hit. And so it seems to be a repeat of that the Russians kind of like pretend that it wasn't an attack, that it was like quote unquote an accident. It seems prima facie, if there was no report of incoming rockets, it seems that it was sabotage. Some sort of special forces operation of some sort to carry out this sabotage. Although I find it very surprising, because I would think that it's very, very well defended. But Mark,
if you remember,
go ahead.
One thing, if you remember a few days ago, this month on the 1st of August, there was a holiday in Crimea, the holiday of naval fleet. So it's like a big holiday on the 1st of August. And if you remember, the Ukrainians sent some drone, maybe even from the territory of Ukraine, and they bombed the head of naval forces in Simferopol or Sevastopol, I don't remember it now, and they killed 4 people. So it's possible that it was some kind of sabotage, because there are a lot of people who still supports maybe Ukraine, and maybe they're using drones. They also attack this airport. So it's possible. I suppose it's possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is significant on a political scale. Full disclosure, I'm not objective in the slightest. My wife is Crimean. My mother-in-law lives in Simferopol, 40 kilometers northwest of Feodorovka, Nova Feodorovka, there where the Saki airfield was hit. And actually, we have family all over eastern Ukraine, Donbass, Kharkov, Odessa. One of the things that's often downplayed in all of this is that I hate having the Kiev regime forces referred to as Ukraine, because there are Ukrainians on both sides of this conflict, right? That has been raging since 2014. There are tens of thousands of Ukrainians fighting. And as Dima and Alex have both pointed out, in the last few months in particular, for a lot of the ground fighting, right? The hand-to-hand fighting going in after the shaping and softening operations, it is East Ukrainians, right? Or former East Ukrainians, citizens of the Donbass republics, who have borne the brunt of most of the hand-to-hand fighting. This is Ukrainians killing Ukrainians, right? And it has been that way for the most part since 2014. I think that the Russian government has a big impetus, a big motivation to try to play down attacks like we've seen there. We also saw this attack that Dima referenced on the Russian Navy Day on the 1st of August. It's a big national holiday, particularly in Navy cities like Sevastopol in Crimea, Vladivostok, St. Petersburg, right, where there's big Navy facilities, bases, personnel. And it seems that it was most likely a makeshift drone attack, basically a small explosive dropped in to the courtyard of the Navy base HQ. And it wasn't a lot of damage, but it showed that Kiev forces can strike, and you can't defend everything everywhere. It has no strategic significance whatsoever. It canceled a parade, but these are more about the information war, right? This is about morale. This is about things like this. And if there was such a sabotage attack, either by explosives planted or some type of makeshift drone launched from in Crimea by sabotage groups, that is entirely possible. And I think the Russian government has every motivation to try to downplay this for political reasons.
Mark, let me ask you then, do you think that it's for the morale, to undermine the morale of the Russians, or boost the morale of the Kiev regime?
Both. I mean, both. And as much to demonstrate to their Western patrons that they are doing something, right? That they are capable of some kind of offensive reaction. It doesn't have to be just one reason. It can
But
be
Mark,
at the same time.
but it reminds me something that the British did during World War II. It's similar. I think what they do, the same with the bombing in Donetsk, is that, in my opinion, it could be to provoke the Russians into doing something careless, into something to divert them from the military objectives and for them to respond in an irrational way. Because when you attack such objectives, you have to respond. The same thing when the population was bombed in Donetsk, for example. The Russians had to push through in Avdiivka, Pesky, and the Ukrainians managed to take the Russian army in that direction, although it's not the easiest front. So I think these attacks are meant to divert the attention and to divert the attention into attacking places they shouldn't.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I will tell you the opinions of most Russians about this situation, because I can understand them better, maybe a little bit. So this situation with airport is this almost a similar situation with Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan. So she came to the island, and now it's time to China to show if they have balls. Right, and now we see if they have or not. The Russians are saying that the Chinese doesn't have balls because they should have shut down this plane immediately. And the same situation is here. If it was the Ukrainian attack, then it's time for the Russians to show the ball, and it's very, very nice step, because if it was some kind of commandos, and we understand that if the situation was provoked by the West intelligence, and it was made by the West, if it was, so that means that the US, they know that the Russians know that it was we, the West intelligence, who did this operation. And now it's your time. Do you have balls, or do you have something to show us? If you are not able to show us anything, that means that maybe we can do something more. Maybe we can bring these ACMAS rockets 300 kilometers, and maybe we can attack even the territory of Russian Federation, and you still don't have balls to show us something on this section. This might be also this situation.
So you're thinking that, Dima, that this is like a provocation, and that the West is behind this this attack, and they're trying to provoke the Russians into an irrational response?
They want to check the level. Where is the red line? Where is this red line? Because according to the old political wars, this is already a red line, and this evening we should see the real war. That the Putin should start his another meeting and to tell that we are declaring the war because they start attacking the territory of Russian Federation. So they want to understand if this operation was prepared by the West countries. The only thing they want to understand where is the red line. Where is the red line?
Why do you think it was prepared by the Western military leadership or intelligence or whatever?
Everything in Ukraine is prepared by the West intelligence.
At least approved by it. Yeah, at the very least approved by it. I think. Go ahead, Dima.
No. Sorry. Continue, please.
Mark, go ahead.
I think you're right. I think there is a level of provocation on this on two sides. I think the Dima and Alex are both right. The first one is this political testing of Russia. And it has to be said that a lot of Russians, the popular sentiment is that the government has not gone far enough in waging a military campaign. You have to remember that this is still a very limited military operation. The numbers of the Russian intervention force and the Donbass have never totaled over 200,000 as far as anyone that I've known has shown. That is small. And a lot of Russians they want the government to at least call up reservists. Russia has 2 million reservists that they have only very, very lightly tapped at this point. It doesn't even have to be a full mobilization or conscription, like has occurred in Ukraine. And right now, the attitude of Russians on the street in Moscow, around the country, they are in many ways as disconnected from this conflict in terms of personal sacrifice and interruption to their lives as Americans during the invasion and bombing of Iraq, which is to say they're not affected at all, right? They don't feel that. But I think that they are ready for it and they will demand it. We've heard from the Russian government many times that if there are strikes in Crimea, if these types of strikes continue, that they will hit what they call decision-making centers, which in American parlance terms is political command and control. Right. The U.S. has no problem bombing Saddam and his family or Gaddafi. Right. They go right for those. Russia has avoided that kind of attacks thus far. And they have promised repeatedly that if this type of, terrorist action, as they call it, it's legitimate military. Right. But if that continues, strikes in Crimea, that they will do this. And we really have seen very light, really just aimed at the brass for the most part, as far as we can tell. And even then at a relatively low rank. So we may see more of this. But I think that Alex is also right. And that an attack like this is an attempt to try to make Russia spread out what is a very small comparative military force, spread it out, try to protect multiple things, rather than concentrate forces in one area where they're punching through defensive lines and making those type of gains that cannot be reversed. So I think it's definitely a bit of both.
Yeah, because the reason why I'm saying this is because in 1940, when the Germans started the Battle of Britain, they first targeted airfields and radar stations and important military facilities. But one day the British, they did a raid on Germany and they started bombing civilian centers. I think it was even Berlin. But the Germans were very pissed. And in exchange, they started bombing London. So they diverted a lot of resources meant for military facilities, for civilian facilities. And the Royal Air Force, was very happy that they could rebuild their forces while the Germans simply wasted all their efforts on civilians. So this is what I'm saying. Perhaps they want the Russians to strike at places that are not essential.
Yeah, it seems to me that at this stage of the game, they're doing what they should have done at the very beginning, which is try to distract and divert the Russians. I mean, for instance, this attack on Crimea, this actually should have happened way back in late February or early March, not now, not here in early August, when, if the numbers that we were discussing before are accurate, and let's posit that they are, and let's assume that they have lost roughly 50,000 men killed in action. Okay, we can discuss, the wounded in action, if they got recycled or not. We won't know for the time being. But the 50,000 KIA, that seems a reasonable estimate based on those figures. This is a huge hole in the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces. It seems to me, and I have not had military experience as Dima and Mark have had, but so I'll ask both of you. With losses like that, 50,000 men killed of a armed force of, I think it was 240 or 260,000 men. I forget. This is a disaster for any army in terms of the morale. How is it that they haven't collapsed? How is it that the armed forces of Ukraine have not collapsed already? Do you have any insight into that? Because, if these losses are true, any army would have just given up the ghost ages ago. Or am I wrong somehow?
I have one opinion, one interesting update. Research I did a few days ago. The answer is very simple. The Ukrainians love Ukraine. They love the Ukraine very much. My wife is from Ukraine, and she had a lot of connections with people from the west side of Ukraine, from Lvov and so on. And she was talking with one girl, and she told that her brother wanted to join Ukrainian army in Lvov, on the west of Ukraine. And he wanted to join, and when he come to the military place where they're recruiting, he asked to be a soldier in Ukrainian army, and they told him that he was, let's say, 2,500 in a row. So he wasn't the first. So he needs to wait a little bit before they will do everything with these 2,500 before him. Then he went to Kiev, and he went to the same place trying to get into army. And they told him that in Kiev he was 500s. So there was a lot of people in front of him. So people are willing to join the Ukrainian army. A lot of people are willing, a lot of young people, I suppose. So he, of course, 500 is not 2,500, so that's why he agreed to be in this line. 2 days later, he got a call, and then he was moved to United Kingdom, where he passed 2 weeks of trainings, and after that, he got to Donbass. So there are a lot of people who still want to fight for Ukraine, who hates Russians, who hate Russia, and who want to fight for their country. There are a lot of them still.
But like 2
brainwashed.
weeks, yeah, 2 weeks. He's not going to last 2 seconds after 2 weeks of training. 2 weeks of training is nowhere near enough. I mean, okay, I admit I have said this. I've never been in the military, but I have heard enough people telling that you need 2 months of basic training and another month or two of infantry training before you are semi-competent in so far as ground combat is concerned. 2 weeks is nothing. Or am I wrong, Mark?
No, it's criminal. It's a joke, of course. I mean, you cannot build a new military out of civilians in the middle of a conflict, right? Part of the goal here, you have to understand, is this is really cynical and this is bitter, but it's also true. The US, the West, they want as many Ukrainians to die as possible. How could that possibly be true? Because they know that Russian or the Eastern Ukrainian repressed political forces that will be elevated in Ukraine after this, they have to govern, right? Every Ukrainian family who loses someone in this conflict, whatever they thought of the regime in Kiev before, whatever they thought of Russia before, is a family that will hate Russia moving forward. Right? They will blame them, right? So that is a big part of the calculus of if Ukraine suffers enough damage, enough losses, then Russia will never be able to win back the hearts and minds of even, some Eastern and Central Ukrainians, much less Western Ukrainians. And Dima's right that Ukrainians love Ukraine, right? But there are at least 2 different Ukraines. Ukraine is a country that is very much socially, politically divided, largely, on east-west lines in terms of national identity concept.
But Mark, there's also one thing, is that the conflict in Ukraine is also complicated because, yes, there's a divide between, let's say, Russian speakers, but a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians are fighting in the Ukrainian army and willingly. And this is what makes the thing very complicated. And I think Dima can confirm or not, but a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians are happy to fight for Ukraine. So they're Russian-speaking, but they don't want to be Russian. So that's another layer.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's not Russian-speaking. It's not Russian ethnic. It is that's why I say national identity concept, right?
Yeah,
and
correct.
The national identity concept of West Ukraine, of Galicia, right? They weren't even part of Ukraine for centuries up until 1939, right? They were part of the Austro-Hungarian Commonwealth Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the biggest part of their national identity conception of what it means to be Ukrainian and what Ukrainian should be is hatred of Russia and Russians. Period. Right.
And there is one important joke about Ukrainians, and this joke is not the joke that was made by the Russians or from any other country. It's a joke among Ukrainians. If there are 3 Ukrainians, 2 of them are bosses and 1 of them are traitor. It's their own national joke.
Sure. And you've heard reports of in the Western media about the hundreds of collaborators that they are arresting in every city in the country, right? I mean, every city. Nikolaev just shut down the entire city over the weekend to go door to door hunting for collaborators.
Sorry, by the way, Lyra, could you tell us what is going on in Kharkiv? Because from the Russian sources, I got update that Kharkiv is going to be shut down, as well as Nikolaev, for searching the traitors and so on. Do you have any information about this?
No, I don't have any information about this at this time. The city seems, I would say, 60% abandoned. And so I would think that the people who have remained are elderly and those people who are pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, excuse me. And so this is an informed guess, but it's a guess. But I do have enough information to think that this is valid to say that, yeah, the people who have remained are hoping that Kharkov within a year will be a Russian city. And the ones who have left are the ones who think that they can find a better place for themselves in the West. Because the people who have left Kharkov, they've gone to Europe. They haven't gone to Western Ukraine because they don't feel themselves to be Western Ukrainian. Okay, and that's something that's very important. Paradoxically, the people in Kharkov area view themselves first as European and then as ethnic Ukrainian. They feel that they have more in common with Western Europeans than with Western Ukrainians, which seems paradoxical, but there you go. And like I said, the ones who have stayed, they're older people, and they are very Russian people. Okay,
But it's normal because
yeah,
they remember
makes
the
sense.
Soviet Union. The youngest, anyone under 30 has been born in Ukraine. They don't know anything about this era.
Yeah, exactly. There's also the obvious situation that there are, before this conflict started, the border between Ukraine and Russia was just easy to cross, and it's 20. Well, no, I think it's 40 kilometers away or something like that. It's not far at all. You can spit over the border practically. And so the point is, a lot of people had family on the other side, and they would go back and forth, and so it was like not a big deal. But as to them going door to door, I have not heard of this. If it happens, it happens. But there are look, in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago, they reported how here in Kharkov they have SBU units going and looking for disinformationists, propagandists, that sort of thing. They hit me up back in April. And my thinking is, whatever comes. I mean, I can't really control it at this point, and so I'm just observing this whole shit show. My personal perspective on this whole situation is that they are keeping information extraordinarily tight here in Ukraine because they are essentially, it seems to me, fooling the population into believing a fairy tale as to how the war is going, and they're certainly hiding the number of casualties. And because I think that, Dima, would you agree with this assessment?
Mm-hmm. And one thing, just be careful, because you know that they're checking phones, and just be careful, checking Telegram channels and so on.
Yeah,
just stay on the safe side.
Yeah,
when you say propagandists, Gonzalo, you mean anyone who is posting anything critical of the regime or anything vaguely supportive of Russia on social media? That's what you mean.
Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I was being facetious when I said propagandists. I'm talking about, I'm not talking about some organized propagandist like, I don't know, Arestovich or somebody. Yeah. I'm talking about just ordinary schmoes that post stuff on Facebook, like what's happened in Britain. Last week they went to the house of some army British Army veteran and arrested him for posting something, for posting a meme that was critical of the trans community on Facebook, and they arrested him. I don't know if you guys saw that, but anyway, it was like a big deal in the UK, and it was just a fucking meme, and they arrested him for it. And something similar is happening here. But it seems that they pay attention to Russian language, Russian language and Ukraine language outlets, and especially Telegram. Telegram seems to have emerged as the outlet, the news source. And it seems clear that the Zelensky regime is on top of Telegram. They're all over it, like white on rice. You know what I mean? But the other social media, they don't care. They don't really care if it's English language, because paradoxically, the target demo of the Zelensky regime doesn't really speak English, and so they don't care about English language social media. They only care about Telegram and Russian news sources of any sort. And that basically seems to be what's going on. But they are, Jesus Christ, they are pushing information control like there's no tomorrow. All the TV channels, they all show the same programming all the time, and it's all patriotic, pro war, pro Ukraine armed forces. And everything is painted with the brightest of brushes. Everything is hunky dory, and victory will be achieved. I mean, I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian for that matter, but I don't need to watch the TV and say, "Oh yeah, that's totally," I mean, you can tell just by the tone of voice of the people talking. I personally think it's a horrible thing and so cynical that they are throwing lives away in this war that should have been negotiated. A ceasefire should have been negotiated months ago. But Mark, to your point that it's a cynical ploy to engender the future resistance to Russian occupation, that seems reasonable. Alex, what do you think of that? Do you think that's
Well,
what they're doing?
Well, you were asking why the Ukrainian army didn't collapse, and I learned a lot from Dima. So thank you for the information. But you have to think that there are about 7 million men that can be brought up in the Ukrainian army. So the losses can be replaced, and as we've seen, they love Ukraine. So for them, it's very minimal, and I see it as a great Ukrainian patriotic war. For them, this is their war of independence. This is how we have to see it. So for them, if people still want to join today, despite the casualties, it's because they really want to join. Now, the problem for the Russian side is that, and this is what a lot of Russian commentators have been saying, is that the Russians don't have enough infantry to capture settlements. So this is very slow. So you have a force of heavy artillery. Ukrainians do have losses, but the Russians don't have enough manpower to capture the settlements. And since it's an urban warfare, you need manpower, you need foot soldiers to capture every block. And this is why it's so slow. The Russians don't have enough men. And a lot of commentators ask for Russia to mobilize a lot of troops because they say at this rhythm, it's not going to go anywhere.
Or they need to think and create something new. Or to change the tactic.
Exactly.
Because with this approach, it will take months before
exactly. Yeah. And this is the main situation in Ukraine. The Russians keep pushing, and it's true. Ukrainians keep retreating. They can't seem to be counterattacking effectively. They can't really regain ground. But it's a bit staling there. Yeah.
To your point of why the Ukrainian military hasn't collapsed, I would argue that, well, first of all, we see daily that it is. I mean, we see the videos uploaded to Telegram of forces refusing to fight, abandoning their positions. We know the desertion. We know the missing rate. So to some degree, it certainly is. The rest of it, a lot of them are just hunkered down in their trenches and they're not going anywhere. And the 2 points that I wrote down immediately, even before you mentioned it, control of information, right? And what information is going out is just a constant sea of ridiculous propaganda, right? It's Baghdad Bob-esque level, insane pronouncements about what is going on with the war. Ukrainians have, who have been taken prisoner of war, Kiev regime forces, have reported that they thought the Ukrainian military was in Rostov in Russia fighting, driving forces back to Moscow, right? That's the level of, propaganda and insane information control that's going on. Secondly, they have political commissars, effectively. They have taken a lot of the nationalists, the Banderite fascists, if you want to call them, and they have sprinkled them throughout all of the regular military units, the territorial defense units. And there's always someone in the group that is willing to report anyone who grumbles about anything, or to put bullets in backs of heads. And that's very real. And we've had lots of reports of that, again, from POWs. And a question of how many, there are definitely in West Ukraine, lots of people who are willing to volunteer and fight this. But at the same time, the regime is raising the conscription age to 70 plus, right? Think about that. 70 plus, grandfather taken out of they don't really have old people's homes in Ukraine, but that idea, put out in his walker on this. You're not winning a war and you don't have droves of volunteers if you're raising the conscription age to 70. So we have to keep a little bit of balance there. But if you want to know what the real state, the morale, the viewpoint of, say, the person who wants to fight for a Western Ukraine, a Kiev regime Ukraine at the front, and why they're still fighting, there was a letter written by a volunteer about the combat in Pesky. The soldier's name was Sergei Gnezdilov. It was then published on Ukrainian online media outlet censor.net. And on my own YouTube channel, small thing, just started it, the Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, I did an entire reading of this letter. So you can go to my YouTube channel and just listen to me.
I'll post it. I'll post the link in the description below.
And you can see how grim it is, right? And that is, it created a huge firestorm on Ukrainian social media. And this guy, as he was writing this letter, was saying, I fully expect to get a bullet in the back of the head for saying this, right? That I will end up on a Mirotvorit's hit list, and that will be the end, because the government, the regime doesn't lie to its people, right? You know, facetiously saying that. And then you have to wonder, what is he fighting for? If that's the attitude. But if you want to get inside the feel of this conflict inside the heads of the Ukrainians fighting for the regime, and I think it's important to understand and emphasize with them to a degree.
Absolutely.
Listen to that letter.
Yeah, you have to understand why somebody would be fighting like this. You know, to pivot a little bit the conversation, the Zelensky regime itself seems to be slowly collapsing because all of a sudden, all kinds of weird signals have been popping out. Like the Western media started criticizing Zelensky. There was a big CBS news show that was going to be talking about how only 30% of the weapons sent arrived to the front. That clip alone got all kinds of people's hackles up. And get this, first they deleted that clip from social media, and then the report itself they put the kibosh on the whole report. You know, Mark, you know about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it was a report, and it was referring to the head and CEO of a Lithuanian, they call it an NGO, Gongo, okay, blue yellow or yellow blue.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that was from 2014 getting Western arms to the Kiev regime from the
so basically a State Department, an annex to the State Department.
And their CEO reported this and supposedly now it's April, and that's why they're trying to backtrack this whole thing. That's only 30% of what was being given was getting to the final destination. Now, there's two parts of that. One is corruption. One is weapons being intercepted and blown up by standoff strikes by the Russian military. But yeah, that of course challenges a whole lot of the Western support on a political level. And so you had to immediately put the kibosh. So they tried to backtrack it by saying, we had to remove it because now they tell us that this was in April, but it's gotten better since then. They removed the report and they'll release it later with updates. Yeah, it's been made to vanish. And this happens at the same time of the amnesty report. And Amnesty has long been, basically a facilitator of U.S. hegemonic military exercises around the world. But for whatever reason, Amnesty has put out a report recognizing what all of us have long known, that the Kiev regime forces are using every residential building, school, hospital, theater, whatever, they're as firing points as bases. And very often they're not even evacuating the people, that they're literally using them as human shields. And this created we've long known this. And even the Washington Post a couple of months ago grudgingly admitted this. Now, it's a war crime, right? If you are supposed to keep your military stuff outside of residential areas, or if you cannot, then get rid of all the people. But as far as the Western media is concerned, the only problem there is it makes it harder for Ukraine to press their war crimes case against Russia. It complicates that. But Amnesty admitted this. And that created a huge political firestorm, and they documented it, right? I mean, this isn't just actually this extensive documentation showing it. And the response was, of course, shoot the messenger, right? Zelensky declared Amnesty International are terrorists, right? Because that's the insane level of unhinged rhetoric that's coming out of Zelensky at this point, because he thinks he can get away with anything. And the head of Amnesty in Ukraine, she resigned in protest over this report. She didn't want it. And she said that it should have been cleared with the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense before it was released. But she's actually already been put on the Mirotvorets, the peacemaker hit list, overseen by the Kiev regime Interior Ministry, because, she didn't do enough to stop it, I guess, at some process. But Amnesty has also tried to kind of pull it back and apologize while still standing by their report. But it shows that no criticality of the regime in Kiev is still acceptable in the propaganda war. It's leaking out, but then it's being stomped on rather crudely.
Dima, I have a question. How do you see the war going by December?
By December, first of all, the very important update and very important news, piece of news, we need to understand what is Poland is going to do in this situation. Because yes, we just talked that the Zelensky regime is collapsing, but we see that they're trying to move all their authorities, all their decision-making centers and so on to Poland, not just in the military sphere, but also in the economy. They're moving their court things, their control things, everything to Poland. So what they're going to do next in this case. But if we are talking about the fact that configuration is not going to change, then I suppose that the Russians will try to encircle or Kharkiv, or they will try to start Nikolaev offensive operation. They need to do something, because during the winter period, they will slow down. And I suppose that starting from December till February, we're not going to see anything. If the Russians are able to encircle Kharkiv by that time, then we will see some kind of storm operation or blockade operation of Kharkiv, some actions. But the Russians are not able to develop their ground positions. That means that they will take pause before the February. Or
But you say a pause in winter, but historically speaking, often in the Eastern Front during World War II, most military operations that the Soviets launched was either in summer or in winter. A lot of the big victories were in winter. So why would they pause in winter?
No, they would pause, I would think, in early winter or late fall, like October, November, because it gets so muddy that it's kind of like impossible to advance. Is that correct, Dima?
One of the winter Russian offensive operation is the Izum operational offensive operation. The thing that we can see right now in 2022, the Russians were trying to do in 1943 and 1942. And when they tried to do the same thing in 1942, they lost around 100,000 soldiers. So any winter operation means a lot of losses. Do the Russians can afford them big losses? No, they can't. So that's why there won't be any offensive operation on winter. Or
okay, let me ask you the following, Dima, because I want to connect the dots between the military situation and the political situation that Mark was outlining, which is the following: is it reasonable to say that by the end of the year, militarily, the Russians will have dominance? I mean, as I understand the map at this point, insofar as the Donbass is concerned, the Russians have to cross the Kramatorsk line, and that's pretty much the end of that battle, right? And they are within a month, say tops 2 months of achieving this, if not sooner. But let's just posit that it's 6 weeks from now. Once that happens, the political situation in Ukraine will be so unbalanced. To bring it in with what Mark was saying, could it be that would be when politically the situation begins to collapse in Ukraine, and the Zelensky regime is forced to flee to Poland? I'm throwing it out to both Mark and Dima. Mark, what do you think? I mean, if there is a clear and catastrophic loss, would the Kiev regime basically abandon ship after that?
Okay, so first of all, I hope that by winter that Donbass will be that the whole of Donetsk will be completely liberated. These are some pretty extensive fortifications still in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and you see how long it's taking through Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Russia's not on any artificial timeline here. They're fully prepared for a long war, right? This, as far as I see it, this is a forever war. This is not going to end. I mean, the best we can hope for is frozen conflict phases of, but this is a new major political security instability in Europe that will go on for the rest of our lives. Because as Dima rightly pointed out, there are lots of people, particularly in Western Ukraine, that really, really hate Russians. And there are lots of people, particularly in Western Ukraine, that really, really even more hate Eastern Ukrainians, Slovak, traitors, Vatnik, whatever they want to call them. Yeah, they regard them as traitors. Again, there has been a civil war in Ukraine since 2014. Before this all started, there were science fiction conventions of books written about the future civil war in Ukraine because it was so obviously precariously balanced between East and West, both internally, domestically, and geopolitically. And yet, remember, up until 2014, Ukraine's neutrality was constitutionally guaranteed. That only changed after the government was overthrown. Yatsenyuk, the first Kiev regime prime minister, he was at one of those conventions. I believe he actually wrote a bit of science fiction about the future civil war. When I was doing my postgrad at the London School of Economics in 2010, I ran a Model UN crisis scenario for the London International Model UN. That was a civil war in Ukraine with Russia and Ukraine entering on both sides, during which I kind of, almost as a joke, I predicted Donald Trump would be president then. That was in 2010. So anyone who knows anything about Ukraine, if you look back at the election results for the last decade in the country, you can see where this was all coming. There is a big, political divide in the country. So I hope that by winter that Donbass will be freed. And as Russia is moving forward, they are trying to reconstitute East Ukrainian political forces and militia forces, right, to take the place of occupation forces. That's why they're trying to keep, this intervention force small. I also agree. I think it's wrong. I think they do need to do a larger mobilization, at least call up the reserves. I said this from the beginning, that they may say they don't want to occupy, but they are going to have to, at least for a number of years, support East Ukrainians as they build up the institutions that have been destroyed, the political repression. Most of the young men will not be capable of reconstituting militia forces in the East. That's all going to have to be built up. But after these defenses are broken down, then there's nothing comparable in the rest of Ukraine. The best of the Ukrainian military will have been completely destroyed in terms of manpower and in terms of gear. This trickle of Western gear is a joke, right? It's more for PR value and tokenism than anything else. That will be the point that if there were to be a political initiative towards surrender, and certainly the Kremlin is going to look for that at that point, they will stop and they say, are you done or do we go on? And if we go on, then it will be Kharkov, Odessa, and Dnipropetrovsk and the entirety of East Ukraine. But that will be well into next year, right? That will be well into the future. At the same time, there's a lot of political instability in Kiev. Supposedly, according to them, Zelensky has already survived some 12 assassination attempts. There's a lot of oligarchs that say supported Poroshenko and the like that are moving against him now. He's moving against them. They're moving. There's a whole lot of fighting undergoing under the cover there. All the things that held the Kiev regime united, right? The anti-Eastern political forces in the country are collapsing. And at some point, the West is going to look for a fall guy to blame, right? For everything, everything that they promised, everything they said about the course of the war, they're going to, have to blame it on somebody, how it didn't turn out the way they said it would. And you can say that this leaks of information and reports that are starting to come may be a potential movement, if they have to move in that direction, to dump Zelensky. But that does not mean that the regime will be over. They will reconstitute it in West Ukraine and Poland. This will go on for a long time.
Mark, Dima, I have a question. What do you think about this thing on Telegram? They say there's a lot of conflict between Zaluzhny, the commander of the armed forces of Ukraine, and President Zelensky. Apparently, Zelensky wants to launch counteroffensive in Kherson, but Zaluzhny prefers to keep the forces in a defensive posture. And so what do you guys think about that?
About the situation, Mark told that as soon as Donbas Arc operation finishes, there is no place where the Ukrainians can hold their position. To the truth, there is one place left, is Dnipro River. And from if we're talking about the very, very beginning of the special operation, Zaluzhny told from the very beginning, and he got advices from the West intelligence to move his forces towards Dnieper. So this is the final battle. Dnieper is the final battle for Ukraine, and this Donbas Arc operation doesn't solve anything. The Ukrainians can lose this Donbas, they can lose Kharkiv. It doesn't mean anything for the Ukrainians, for the West countries. The most important to keep Odessa and to keep Dnipro line, and they will fight there. So the grand battle we're going to see there on Dnipro. So that's why I suppose that there is some conflicts between Zaluzhny and Zelensky. First of all, we understand that in a year there are going to be a president election in this country. There are a lot of money on their level of decision making.
Well, yeah, I can say about those presidential elections, they're going to be pro forma, because the Zelensky regime has outlawed every political party except his political parties and the far right political party. So he's going to win that election. It's trivial. They're going to continue as it is. Okay, I'll tell you what I personally think. Just very quickly, and I'd like to know what you guys think about this possibility that in the long run, at the end of this, the Russians will take everything east of the Dnieper River, including potentially eastern Kiev, and just because the river is a natural barrier on the one hand, and of course they will take Odessa, no question about that. And to the north of Odessa, it's just cow country, so it's not that hard to defend. But insofar as the Western Ukraine, it will be a rump state, and I would not be surprised if just political chaos reigns there, and the Russians use saboteurs, infiltrators to stir up even more trouble in Western Ukraine. I mean, that would be reasonable, and it's a cost-effective way to keep the Western Ukraine regime, after this conflict is sort of like over, unstable and just complicated problems. But the issue for me is I guess I want to know, Dima, the following: could there have been any way that the Ukrainian armed forces could have won against the Russians the way the Russians are conducting this special military operation? Because it seems to me that what they are doing is they are just hunkering down in their defenses and waiting as the Russians just grind away with artillery and break through. Could there have been any way for the Ukrainian armed forces to have defeated the Russians?
They
see what I'm saying?
They can't defeat the Russians, but they can stop them on the certain line. And I'm talking
Which
about
line?
Dnipro,
It seems
Dnipro River. So this is the reason. This is the reason why we see a lot of conversation about Kherson, because Kherson is the only bridgehead that the Russians have on the west side of this river. This is the only bridgehead. And if the Ukrainians are able to push the Russians back, then they have a small chance to stop the Russians on this river. This is a very big river. It's a very wide river.
Oh, yeah. It's
there
huge.
is just 4 points where the Russians can cross. 5 points.
Yeah.
Kiev, Cherkasy, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Kherson. 5 points where the Russians can cross this river. And I don't think they can cross this river in Kiev. Don't think they can cross this river in Dnipro, Zaporozhye. It's a big towns. So Kherson also, if they will be pushed back, they won't be able to go back. Only Cherkasy, this is the only place where the river is not very wide. So they can cross Cherkasy, but it's in the middle of Ukraine. So they don't need to get there first. It's not very easy. So if the Ukrainians are able to push the Russians from Kherson, starting their famous offensive operation, then this situation can give them a chance to stop the Russians at all, because it's very difficult to cross this river.
Okay, I don't think there's going to be any serious. I don't think that the Kiev regime has the capability to push Russia out of Kherson. I don't think that they're capable of combined armed maneuver. They don't have the artillery necessary. They're charging across steppes where your opponent has both artillery and air superiority, at least locally. That's suicide with cannon fodder. But I don't know if you've heard in recent
You are right.
hours.
You're right. Suicide operation.
Yeah,
just suicide operation.
The presidential advisor, one of the presidential advisors, the ideologues, Mikhail Podolyak, tweeted out, he also discussed it, that all of the, again, it could go back the other way, but what he's saying now is that everything you've heard about the Kherson offensive, that was a clever psychological information warfare by Kiev to spread out their offenses, and it worked. So it's what they intended to do has been successfully completed. That's what
they successfully brought 30,000 Russians at the gate of Mykolaiv. This is they successfully managed to do this. A great operation.
The cope, man.
No, but really,
the famous line: the bullshit piles up so fast, you need wings to stay above it.
But
by the way, just one important thing. There was a very interesting comment in this in our comments. I checked this one important comment. I want to discuss this one more time about the further steps. Yes, the Russians still can crack the west of Ukraine without crossing the river from the territory of Belarus. Of course, it's possible because you don't need, but this is totally other situation with Belarus, and we saw this operation one more time.
Politically, it would be a big deal.
Good point. But that's the thing. Now the Russians have a lot of forces in front of Mykolaiv, even Kryvyi Rog. I don't know how you pronounce it. But that's it. They could attack in both directions, and it would be disastrous for Ukraine if any of these cities would fall.
I don't think it's possible for now to crack these towns. It's very difficult because every single of these towns, like Kryvyi Rog it's impossible to take at all. It's a very long town, and it's like Solidar. You can't encircle this town. If we're talking Zaporozhye, Dnipro, these towns is bigger than Mariupol, and anyway, you won't be able to encircle these towns as well. Maybe Zaporozhye you can't, but you need to attack from both sides and to cross a big distance. And you need to cross from the west side, Kryvyi Rog from the south, and you will be in a very big danger by the flank attack from the north. It's very difficult. Kharkiv and Nikolaev is we can say, the best solution for the Russians in this case.
And a long time ago, a couple of months ago, I made a video about what the Ukrainians could have done, and because you just asked, Gonzalo, but in my opinion, they should have retreated to a line further back instead of fighting for that salient in Luhansk, because they spread out their forces. And I think you saw one of my videos in the past where I said Ukraine, their goal should have been to do like the Croatians did to the Serbs. That means have a huge army in the back of Ukraine, 100,000 men, 150,000 men that you train for 3 months, 4 months with all the modern equipment. But for this, you have to hold the line somewhere like the Dnieper would have been good. You don't need too many men to hold the line. And with that huge force, you can just attack. But they didn't. They sent all the equipment directly on the front line, piecemeal, all the reinforcements. There's no huge army being formed in the back. And Dima just said it's 2 weeks training for the new recruits. You can't form a huge assault force with this. The troops are simply sent to plug the gaps. And this is my huge criticism. There's no huge army in Ukraine that can effectively counterattack. So they're bound to a positional posture. So the idea for the Ukrainians to reconquer the ground becomes smaller and smaller every day, and I think the Western media is starting to notice it. And anyway, at the rate of this happening at the moment.
Okay, let's have a show of hands. I mean, do we all basically agree that the Russians, at the state of play now, the Russians are going to overrun the Donbass and take it over, and that we all agree on that, right? Okay, do we all agree that Zelensky's position is becoming increasingly untenable because of a failure to win? Because it's clear that the war is being lost. And it might take months, it might take years, but there isn't any real doubt that the Russians will succeed in taking over all of eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, and turning, the Black Sea into a Russian lake practically, and that the Kiev regime will be forced to move west, and therefore Zelensky's position will be extremely weak. Do we all agree on that?
Or there could be a new government, like you mentioned, like, for example, a new military commander as a president. That could be possible. This is something historically that happened a lot. When the civilian government fails, the military takes over.
Yeah, exactly. Now, a third proposition. Do you all agree that the Kiev authority, whosoever it is, the military authority, if it's a military coup that takes over, or if it's the Zelensky regime that continues, they will under no circumstances have any intention of a negotiated ceasefire with Russia? Do we agree with that? Or do you think that there will come a moment that they will agree, okay, let's have a negotiated settlement? Mark?
Let's make another question, the same question. Do the United States of America are ready for negotiation with the Russians? If they do, so I think that the USA are not ready for this, at least for now.
Okay.
First of all, I think the West has complicated their ability to ditch everything on Zelensky and feed him to the wolves, either internally or whatever, because they've made such a huge PR Churchillian, Vogue president figure out of him. That really complicates their ability to ditch him.
Well, actually, Mark, I did a video and I basically, I completely agree with you. And I made a video saying that to the West, to the Americans, Zelensky is worth more dead than alive. I actually think that maybe the Americans decide to kill him the way that
Make
they did.
Martyr out of him.
Yeah, exactly. And build marble statues to his memory after he's safely dead. And
that's a very realistic possibility. That would solve that problem.
It would solve a lot of problems.
Could you tell me? Did we have such examples in the past when the United States of America killed the president of their allies?
Yes, in South Vietnam. In South Vietnam, the name of the president is slipping my mind right now because of the Alzheimer's.
So it's not the case, right? We got this in the past from the United States. Okay,
yes, this has happened.
That means they can.
President Diem. He was killed in 1963, a month before John Kennedy was killed, as a matter of fact. He was the client regime of the United States after the United States inherited the South Vietnam problem from the French. And Diem was a complicated fellow, and in the end, he was assassinated. I forget the reasons. I mean, this is very well-known history. It's not unusual. But also, you can look at people like Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was supported by the Americans against Iran. There's a famous picture of him with Saddam Hussein with Donald Rumsfeld, back when Rumsfeld was no, he wasn't chief of staff. He was somebody important at the time, but he wasn't yet the Secretary of Defense. That was later. No, there are a number of regimes that were supported by the United States until they were no longer useful, and then they were thrown to the wolves or abandoned, or their enemy was supplied with weapons and gear and whatnot, or they were assassinated, like Diem. Okay, so the notion that they would not, because I mean, look at it from the American point of view. If Zelensky, if there's more attention paid to his corruption, okay, and money being siphoned off, that's going to upset a lot of Americans because they feel that they have spent so much money on the Zelensky regime, even though the truth is that most of that money has gone to American weapons manufacturers. There is the perception that the Ukraine government is getting all of this American money. So if it becomes like a big stink of how much Zelensky himself has. I mean, he has a personal fortune of close to $600 million, and he's a fucking actor. Okay, so obviously that money was stolen from somewhere, from some place that he got that money. And so if that becomes more of an issue, he could become such an embarrassment. And like Mark was saying, he's been built so much by the media that it might be better to just kill him, blame it on the Russians, turn him into a martyr, and have the military regime take over and have the military negotiate a ceasefire for the best interests of Ukraine or something like that. You see what I'm thinking?
I think you have to remember that, first of all, the U.S. has always had a complicated relationship with Zelensky as a creature of Kolomoisky, right? The oligarch Kolomoisky. They wanted Poroshenko, or they wanted the former defense minister of Ukraine to be the new president. They didn't want Zelensky. They've made the best of the situation. So I think the martyrdom is, you pointed that out. I think that's a very plausible idea. But I also think that there's a real possibility yet that at some point, and either the fall of Donbass or a potential move towards Kiev itself, is a very possible of a Western intervention yet. I do not see.
Well, Mark, this is exactly, I was thinking about it, and I wanted to ask you guys about it. Just imagine the Russians attack Mykolaiv and then push to Odessa. Do you think that this could be the sign of a foreign intervention? Perhaps this is why they haven't done it yet. I was thinking this is a good excuse.
Yeah, it won't be NATO, right? There's not enough political unity for that. But something done by the U.S. and Poland moving into Western Ukraine, there's a lot of serious people talking about this in Washington, the think tankers, the RAND Institute, so forth, not with the intention of directly engaging, right, the Russian military. That will be their explanation, their justification, but of protecting the people, in Lvov. Or the big question is, will they move into Odessa before Russian forces get there, with the intention of keeping a seaport for a rump West Ukrainian state? And that is where the real potential for Russian Western military conflict lies.
I'll tell you, if it just the Polish forces, the Russian will have a very big joy to crack the Polish forces in Odessa. They will be very happy to do this. So without support of one big country like the USA or Great United Kingdom, any intervention will be very pleaseful for the Russians. They will be happy to see any intervention like Poland, like Romania in Ukraine. They will be very happy.
Well, I think that the strike on the Odessa port the other day, when they allowed, when they negotiated the exit of grain, and then the very next day the Russians hit some military targets at the port, I think that was just basically a message, saying, don't fuck with us, don't send military gear to Odessa, because we'll hit it. We'll hit it at the drop of a hat. Mark, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's that intention, but it's a very important geopolitical point. And if just Polish forces, Polish supported by the Americans, whatever, move into Western Ukraine or Odessa, then there's always the political question. If then Russia strikes them and there is a direct conflict, there will be lots of very false, Article 5. Right. All of NATO needs to be pulled in. Of course, Article 5 doesn't actually cover that, and Article 5 doesn't actually dictate the terms, because technically it would be an extraterritorial, but it would still be, talked about, discussed, used as
just important
Russia will be very cautious of that.
Let's talk one important update. Yes, we see NATO on the one side and we talk about Russia on the other side, but we're talking about Article 5. Don't forget that. Let's say Russia has 2 million soldiers. Belarus has 100,000 soldiers. That's not much. But let's talk about the Asian countries like Uzbekistan, like Kazakhstan. There are another 3 million of soldiers who's just sitting and waiting when the Russians are going to use their article. And so do we believe that anybody on the West side are able to hold 5 million army?
let me ask you a question. Do you actually believe that any other members of the Collective Security Treaty Organization would back Russia in a conflict with the West in Ukraine? Because I do not. I don't even know if Botka in Belarus would, as much as I love Botka.
I don't. The same situation we can say about the NATO. I don't believe that
true,
everybody will follow the Article number 5. It's the same situation.
I agree. But we've seen in NATO this coalition of the willing thing happen before, and even if Greece doesn't go in for it, other countries might.
Yeah, but the coalition of the willing, insofar as NATO is concerned, in this particular conflict, I think that is just evaporated, because I think that we haven't realized something, that everybody is in shock at the kind of industrial warfare that we're seeing, because all the NATO countries were used to kicking the shit out of some little country like Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya. Or even Serbia. I mean, no disrespect to Serbs who are listening, but the fact is it was a small country compared to the NATO countries, and certainly in terms of their armed forces. And so it wasn't anybody to really worry the NATO countries, but Russia certainly is. And they've shown themselves willing to hit where it hurts. And I think that no NATO country, I think that when push comes to shove, no NATO country would get on board with a war. If Poland or the United States, or Poland and the US together, decided to get into the mix, I do not believe that the Germans, and certainly not the French, would get on board. And Turkey, no way would they support this. I mean, no way would the Turks put themselves in the position where a Turkish soldier is going to be firing on and being fired upon by Russian soldiers. That's just
that did happen in Syria. I think you'll remember.
Okay,
that.
yeah. Okay, fair enough.
In
but in this context,
it's a different situation. It's a different situation.
Yeah, because the Turks are perfectly aware how existential this is. Syria was not so existential for the Russians, and more of an issue for the Turks.
It is. There's also something that we haven't taken into account, and it's hard to, is there's more than just a military and political aspect here. There is a big economic factor that will play into how this all turns out. It's general winter, right?
Yeah.
The Europeans are going to have a real hard times with energy supply this winter.
Oh, yeah.
Germany is building public heating centers where people will be able to come. No, real. I know. Able to come and get war. Poland is advising their citizens to start collecting firewood off of the forest floor, right? But it has to be loose, and they still have to pay. They have to have it go and measured by the forest rangers and pay a certain nominal fee or something.
Oh God, that sounds so gay. But okay.
Right? I mean, if you talk the fuel poverty levels that they're looking at in the UK, it's like 40%. That's going to have a big say about how this all plays out, because the EU is not going to be able to find alternate supplies from Azerbaijan or West Africa to meet their energy needs come this winter. And that's going to play out economically and politically and have a big, maybe even a bigger effect than what happens militarily on the ground in any one particular location. And also, this is just a little bit off to the side, but I noticed the report, and I wanted to get it before we finish up. CNN actually put out a report, and they've already tried to pull it back as well.
Oh yeah, I know.
On the border with Zaporozhye, between Ukraine and Russian-controlled territory, there are long columns of vehicles, of people going in one direction to try to get into Russian-controlled territory. And they all say, oh, we're just going to
visit Auntie.
We're all just going to visit Auntie. At the same time, all of their possessions are heaped on the top of their cars, and their cars are full of children. Of course, they can't admit it before they get into Russian territory. But there are huge numbers of people trying to get out of Zaporozhye and other territory there. Again, that is very different Ukrainians from what you're going to find in Lvov, as Dima pointed out.
These people who is going to Mariupol, mainly this the people who's going to Volnovakha, Mariupol, because there was a law adopted that people will get $2,000 who comes back to. So if you want to get this money, you need to come back, and $2,000 in Ukraine, that's a lot of money. You can use this money to survive till the end of this year. This is the level of the salaries right now in Ukraine. So that's why people understand that it's a money question. By the way, there is a second channel near Chuguyev in Kharkiv area. There between from Chuguyev towards somewhere in the north of Kharkiv, there is another way where the Ukrainians can cross and to get to Russian territory, Russian controlled territory.
Yeah, and look, it's very weird in the Western media. It's very clear that the Western democracies have become authoritarian / totalitarian, and there's very tight control over the information. And so that's why it's really remarkable how the mainstream media, there are like these little bursts of information that are coming out that lead one to conclude that the media is like letting out little bursts of steam of truth about the Ukraine conflict, which I find really interesting. Like this issue of whatchamacallit, of people moving to the east, to Russian controlled territory, like the fact that they were admitting the issue of what you call it, the weapons not getting to Ukraine, that only 30% get to the front, that the rest are just disappear somewhere. These little clues, it reminds me of like in the 80s, there was Kremlinology, and everybody would study every little thing that would come out of Pravda and everything that would be come out of the Soviet Union in order to understand and predict more or less what was happening inside the Kremlin. It's a bit like that insofar as the mainstream media. It seems that the support of the Western regimes is so soft, and I'm kind of like wondering what exactly is keeping it aloft. I mean, I'm wondering. I'm not asking you to speculate because nobody can really know who doesn't have actual insider information. But clearly, within the Western regime, the whole Ukraine debacle, a lot of people in the West seem to want to get rid of it, be done with it, turn their attention elsewhere because they sense that it's a losing cause. Do you guys think that this is accurate?
We need to understand one important thing. Why the West can't leave Ukraine right now, today, to finish this war and so on, and to give Ukraine to Russians. It's because the Ukraine has the biggest army in Europe. Let's say it's maybe they're not well equipped, they don't have a lot of West weapon, but believe me, if the Russians come and they will tell them that you see what you've done, you see what the West countries done with your country. We are not bad, they are bad. And if the Russians will provide the Ukrainians the Russian weapon, where this 1 million army is going to go next? To Romania? To Poland? And they will, because they anyway they want to have revenge. They want to have revenge. So that's why Ukrainian army is not so dangerous.
Let me understand you correctly. I just want to recap what you just said. Do you believe that the Russians, once they have taken Ukraine, will arm the Ukrainians to create a big army to go and...
They can do this. Why not? 1 million army, already prepared forces, who is very upset with the situation that, for example, West countries did with them, killed Zelensky, let's say, or started all those Maidans.
Do you think that the Russians could carry out such a change of mind of the Ukrainian nation?
Of course they can. Easily they can do this.
Tell us why. I'm very curious. I'm not disputing you. I want to know how you see this happening.
If if the West countries is going to, let's say, surrender and to give up today, right? The Russians are not going to return everything. They will put their president on the head of Ukraine. Let's say the West countries, the USA, left Ukraine. And of course, there is no situation when the chair will be empty. Somebody will going to take this chair. And in this case, the pro-Russian president is going to take this chair. And after that, we're going to see brainwash process. And the Ukrainians will be told that everything was happened not because of Russians are so bad. but because they were fooled by the West countries. And it's their fault what happened since the 2014. The Russians didn't want this situation. They just wanted you to speak Russian. That's it. They didn't want anything else. And the West countries started this war, everything to split the Ukraine. And now they killed like 200,000 of your men and left you, dropped you. So Ukrainians will be very angry and upset. They will receive money from Russia. They will get cheap gas, cheap fuel. The Russians will start invest money in their economy and so on. And after that, it won't take much time to arm this army and to turn this army in direction of the West countries. And it will be a very well prepared Ukrainian army, very angry army, who was threatened by, who was dropped, who was abandoned by the West countries. And with help of this, the Russians and Ukrainians and Belarus and other countries are going to do a lot of things. So this is the reason why the West countries are not going to leave Ukraine right now. And the talks about fighting to the last Ukrainian is the talk that this army is also very big danger for the West countries, but not just for the Russians.
But Dima, nice. I didn't think about this scenario, and I think it's very interesting. But don't you think that Ukrainians could also be pissed that they lost a huge chunk of their land? So yes, for sure, you have a huge army, but they'll be like, yeah, but you guys took half of our country. In the case of a defeat, let's say in a total defeat, like.
To tell the truth, if let's say the president of Ukraine is going to be the godfather of Putin, we know this guy from Kiev, let's say, or pro-Kremlin guy who is, let's say, yes, let's say, no, but doesn't matter. Anybody who's pro-Russian and who speak Russian and Ukrainian, let's say that, believe me, it's not a very big deal to do this. It's not a very big deal to change their minds of Ukrainians.
Mark, what do you think?
And furthermore, the Russians can play with this. Let's say one person come and he go to Putin, ask him, Putin, could you return us, let's say, Zaporozhye? And Putin, okay, take back the north of Kharkiv. We don't need the north of Kharkiv. Will be Ukrainians happy to receive back a Kharkiv area? They will be happy. They will be very happy, and maybe they will be so happy, so they will forget about everything else. It's possible. It's people. Sometimes it's enough to give something than nothing, and it can change your mind totally, because your word will be the last word.
Mark, what do you think of this possibility?
First of all, the reason why the West can't drop Ukraine at this point. First of all, it's geopolitics, and they've staked the future in this part of the world of Western hegemony on incorporating Ukraine. Think of the old risk board, right, into the West. If you don't take a space on the board, then your opponent will take that space and use it against you. And that's the way both the West and Russia are thinking here. And it's an analogous situation to Taiwan and China, and a lot of parallels, however many contextual differences there are being drawn. And they're saying that if the West loses Ukraine here, then that will embolden China to take Taiwan fully back. I mean, Taiwan is part of China, but, politically, on paper. So they see that as a really bad precedent for being defeated here. And remember, Russia has, in proxy wars, beaten the West in Georgia, in Syria, and now in Ukraine as well. That's 3 defeats in a row. That's going to play really badly. As for Ukraine, right? Ukraine is broken. Ukraine will never be one unified state again. Humpty Dumpty pushed off the wall. You can't push this thing. It was too finely balanced between these internal national identity conceptions, all these problems, language, politics, culture, history. It was always going to be the partition or balkanization of Ukraine. It's just on what lines. 50 years of the Soviet Union was not enough to get rid of the Banderite mentality in Western Ukraine. Nothing will. You're going to see Western Ukrainians and Eastern Ukrainians killing each other at some level, even if it's just frozen conflict for the rest of our lives. That is going to happen. There will never be one united Ukraine or one united Ukrainian military. At the end of this conflict, what Ukrainians are going to want, right, at least in eastern Ukraine and in large parts of central Ukraine, is they're going to be tired of war. They're going to be tired of politics. They're just going to want lives. They're going to want children and apartments and steady jobs. They're going to want stability. They're going to want an end to the corruption that has ruled Ukraine since the 1990s, because they never had a Putin figure who leashed the oligarchs to the state, like happened in Russia, right? The oligarchs have ruled Ukraine, and Putin has spoken about that. And one of the big problems with the Russian prescription for Ukraine up until 2014 was their bet that the Eastern Ukrainian oligarchs would help keep control of Ukraine and keep it neutral for them. And it completely failed next to West Ukrainian political ideology and sentiment, which just overran the whole country from 2014 on, with outside help and support and everything. But you're never going to see there is, believe me, Russia does not have the political or the economic or to push into Europe, and certainly Ukraine will not either. Maybe in 100 years from now, things that might be different, right? But we can't talk about that now. I don't think.
I have a question for you guys from a previous topic. If I think you both think that if Russia mobilized a lot of men, it would change the course of the war drastically. Why hasn't Putin done it already? If it's so obvious, what is the drawback of such a decision?
I think it's because Putin is fundamentally a cautious guy. I mean, first of all, it's clear that within the Kremlin, he is a moderate, number one, because there are a lot of people, as I understand it, within the Kremlin who want, a big mobilization, a big push, and like just go to war already. None of this pussyfooting around shit. Okay, so Putin is a moderate. He's also exceptionally cautious. I think that he's also concerned that if he does a big mobilization, it will have a political cost to him. And I think that he's willing to accept that cost, but he wants to get the best bang for the buck, if you will. So if he makes a call for a total mobilization now, when in a realistic sense, you don't really need that total mobilization now, because the expeditionary force that they have right now in Ukraine is carrying out the job slowly but surely, but carrying it out. I think that he might be keeping it in his back pocket, just waiting for the right opportunity or the necessity to play that card. I mean, he has always struck me, and Mark, you follow this a lot more closely than I do. He's always struck me as a man who's very reluctant to play his best cards until he's absolutely sure that he's going to get the most effect out of it, or he recognizes that there's no other possibility. And so it's like, for instance, like right now, as I understand it, Dima would be able to answer this. It seems that the Russians are not using their best equipment insofar as this conflict is concerned, not their best anti-air air defense systems, not their best planes, not their best tanks, and perhaps not even their best soldiers, precisely to hold them in reserve in case they need to handle NATO. And so it seems to be a basic strategy of just holding back your best card until you absolutely need to play it. Mark, would this be a fair assessment, or do you think it's wrong for some reason?
Yeah, I think you've got part of it. I definitely think Russia is holding some forces in reserve for that potential of a NATO conflict. I also think that's part of the reason why they haven't done a larger mobilization. I think they will have to, right? Again, I don't think they have to mobilize the entire population. The reserves are more than enough. But the reason they haven't done it so far is because of the escalation spiral with NATO. If they mobilize huge number of troops that are an obvious permanent occupation force, and that would, in fantasists' mind at least, potentially threaten NATO countries, that will then create NATO, the political unity, that the military motivation to intervene as well. So you saw a lot of this in Syria, where the Russian was very incremental rather than go in a big way, loud, all at once. Putin is cautious and he likes doing things a little bit at a time, right? The frog boiling in the pot of water rather than risk everything with a political bigger counter reaction right at once. There would be a domestic political cost in Russia, but I don't think it's as large as they think it would be in the West. I think it's much more about preventing this escalation cycle.
Gonzalo, could you give me possibilities to share the screen?
Sure. I'll put it up right now.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
So do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
If the Russians wanted to take control over Ukraine from the very beginning of this special operation, they wouldn't attack Chernihiv, Kiev, as you can see on the north.
Right.
They would do the simple step. They would attack from Belarus towards the west side of Ukraine. And during the first days, they would be able to to encircle the entire Ukraine. They will cut all roads from Poland to NATO country to Ukraine. From the west, from the south, this job would be done by the Moldova forces, that's in Transnistria, and that's it. Yeah. And there would be no Ukraine at all. There would be no support, no supply, nothing from the west, because
by the way, let me just add something to the viewers. You see that line that's going from western Belarus to cutting across western Ukraine. Well, there's actually a road that parallels that border between Ukraine and Poland. I've crossed it. I rode my motorcycle there. I know that country, not that well, but well enough. It's all flat country, and there are no defenses whatsoever. It's just you could cross it. An army could cross it in a week. I mean, from top to bottom, and hold it for a week, because, like I said, there's this road that parallels the Polish-Ukraine border that is more or less where the line that you drew is, and so it would be very, very easy to have done that. Yes.
The Russians took control over much more bigger territory than they needed to cross to stop everything from the Belarus towards the Romania, and that's it. There would be no Ukraine already. There would be no war. Maybe some local resistance in the middle, but without West support, the entire Ukraine would collapse much more faster than we.
So you think it was a mistake that they didn't do this?
I think it's the same answer for the question why Putin didn't start mobilization. It's the same. It's the one answer for these two questions about mobilization and why the Russians didn't start their offensive operation from the west at the beginning of this situation. So this is the same answer. Something happens. Something happens. We don't know. Something happens in Putin's mind, and we don't know what is going on. The real reason, the real purpose.
A greater counter reaction from NATO that could lead to nuclear war.
Okay, yeah, I see.
I think so too. I think so too, because that bold move, you're right. It would cut off
solve all problems. Of course.
Yeah. And frankly, I had a long conversation in March with somebody precisely about that, because I was thinking that seems to be the logical next move, and it never actually happened.
Furthermore,
I think it is because of that reason of not wanting to escalate with NATO. Yeah.
Furthermore, by making this move, the Russians would blockade the most powerful forces in Ukraine, the Ukrainians from the west, from Lvov, from Ivano-Frankivsk, from the West Ukrainians. It's the people who hates Russia. I don't think
but that's part of it. Putin has learned lessons both from the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, and from watching the Western military with their disastrous adventures in the Middle East over the last couple of decades. Putin is very cautious about occupations. Putin is very cautious about moving Russian troops where the people, at least the majority of the people there, don't want them, because he knows the potential long-term costs of occupation. That's why for 8 years he tried to push Minsk as a political solution, right? With a very limited hold on Donbass, where the support there was 80%, right, in favor of Russia, and of course even higher in Crimea, because he hoped to force a political solution, because he didn't want to have to occupy parts of East Ukraine where, say, only 50 or 60% of the population would either support or at least be apathetic to a Russian presence. In Western Ukraine, that's 90% against.
Yeah.
He does not want to put Russian boys and girls occupying territory like that. Russians don't want it. It would be a huge mistake, I think, which is again, that combined with the escalation cycle is why, the threat of NATO counter reaction is why Putin didn't do that from the beginning. But I think that Russia is still going to be forced to at least temporarily occupy more parts of Ukraine, at least up to the east of the Dnieper, maybe a little bit beyond it, that they didn't want to, while they're attempting to build up local populations. And if you take a look at, say, Kherson, who's governing Kherson? Right. Yeah. Yes, there's an overall military, force there, but this is East Ukrainians. This is the former mayor of Kherson City from the old Party of Regions, and then the opposition bloc. He is now the governor of Kherson. These are the repressed political forces, representative, that were elected by the people of East Ukraine previously, who have now been elevated. Just like when the regime in 2014 seized power in Kiev, they purged all of these political forces and elevated their own politically loyal people over the entirety of the country as governors and so forth. So they're going to attempt to build up the local population to stand on their own, just as they have with DNR and LNR over the last 8 years. But it's not an immediate process, and they're not as completely reliable and stalwart in many situations. Although DNR and LNR have proved a bit of their mettle, I think, in the last couple of months.
And I have a question, Matt, as a last intervention. What do you guys think about the US? Because on one side of the checkboard, a lot of people keep talking about HIMARS and then the delivery of anti-air systems and everything. What do you guys think about it? From my end, I talked to someone who's actually a specialist with the HIMARS. He was part of the logistics of this unit, and he said the problem is that the HIMARS is a weapon made for the US Army, and for the logistics of the US military, you need, for a battery of HIMARS, you need 130 vehicles of command and supplies. Yeah. Now, so that's it. You can't just send a HIMARS on its own. There's an entire logistical train and wagon that goes behind every vehicle. Now, yeah, you can send a couple of them, but do you guys think that it actually changes the war, or not really?
No. Well, I think that, okay, I am, like I said many times, I have no military experience whatsoever. But from my understanding, there are multiple problems. Number one, the HIMARS are not magic. They're just multiple rocket launch systems, and the Ukrainians had them in spades, but they just got destroyed by the Russians. What the HIMARS are bringing, apparently there was a comparable unit that the Ukraine army had that is now gone. Yeah. Okay. So it's basically the same thing.
The Russian had it, not the Ukrainian.
Okay. Sorry, but be that as it may, at the end of the day, there are no magic bullets. Okay, in any situation. And so the HIMARS, and before that, it was the M777s. And there's something else too that I've noticed, that the American weapons, because that's what we're really talking about, or Western weapons, well, they need a lot of spare parts. They are relatively delicate and fragile in the face of hard combat. Well, they might be, when they're working perfectly, they're super weapons, sure, but things break down when you're out in the field. And it was the Assistant Minister of Defense of Ukraine who said that the problem with the M777s is that you use them for a few rounds of combat, not rounds, but not shells, but like for a few hours of combat, and then you need to repair it. And because they don't have the equipment and the infrastructure to repair it, they have to send it all the way back to Poland to get it repaired. So it's a white elephant. It seems to me all these weapons seem to be white elephants.
Well, that's what I meant when I sometimes criticize the Ukrainian army, is because they don't have the logistical capabilities to take care of this on their own. This is what an army is. It's not only guys fighting on the front line. It's maintenance guys. So you can give equipment. You need to train people on how to repair this equipment, because whatever equipment, even Soviet equipment, needs maintenance. Soviet equipment is easier to maintain, let's say. But But a lot of the American weapons are meant for the American military, and they have a lot of they have a lot of money to repair it. Now, that's what I think. The problem is not only sending weapons, is that there's an entire logistical thing. Even for the wounded, apparently a lot of the wounded are sent to Poland because they can't take care of them.
Because but that's because the medical system here, it's not that the medical system can't take care of them, it's that they're overwhelmed. That's the problem that they're having. So I mean, I've used the Ukrainian medical system. I had to go now because of these kidney stones that I was having. I went there this morning, as a matter of fact. No, it's perfectly fine, and it works fine, but it's just overwhelmed, you know, and that's the problem.
I must say that I think that HIMARS, this always part, is the game changer in this conflict, but not for the Ukrainians and not for this conflict. This situation with supply from the West countries is the game changer for upcoming possible conflicts, because as soon as this situation in Ukraine ends, the Russians need to upgrade entire army. They need to change all their everything they use. Everything, because now what the West countries are doing or not, they're testing their systems. For example, if we're talking about Kherson, they attacked Kherson with their HIMARS when Kherson bridge, I'm talking about, was under protection of S-300 systems, and those systems couldn't handle with those rockets. So that's why the Russians were forced to move their S-400 systems, and these S-400 systems are okay with HIMARS. But now the West countries can improve their rockets and to test S-400. And they will do this until they reach S-500 systems. And as soon as the West countries are able to crack S-500 protection systems, then we can say that the game has changed. Because
sorry, but
the Russians don't have more powerful weapon than S-500s, and they need to improve this weapon, and the West countries, they have. So it's the test. It's just a test. The NATO are testing their weapon against the Russian protection systems and so on.
And that means that we could see, for example, the Germans sending their Leopard 2s or the French sending the Leclerc to test them using the same logic. For them, it would be very beneficial, no?
Yes, very beneficial. And now they're getting a lot of benefits, because the West countries have every single type of weapon that Russians have. They have T-72 with all kind of modernization. They have their Akatse. They have their MSTA. They have everything. They have even Terminators, I suppose, that maybe there was some types of battles when the Ukrainians managed to capture. The West countries have every single type of Russian weapon. They do have even parts from their calibers, because calibers reach the target, it blows, and of course you can using the back engineering to recreate caliber. It's not a problem today. But the Russians, they don't have modern West weapons. So this is the reason why the Russians want to get HIMARS. They want to get them just to understand how they can counter to give something.
Apparently they bought one of the HIMARS from the
apparently they bought. But
so go ahead.
The Russians still don't have any West airplanes like F-16, F-22. They still don't have every type of West rockets, but the West countries have caliber, has the parts of Kinjal weapon. They have everything, and they can, using back engineering, to recreate everything and to find a solution how to crack this weapon. And the Russians don't have such possibilities right now. And it's very big.
Alex, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so using the logic of Dima, which is very interesting, that means that the Russians have every incentive to stop the war at some point. That way they can pause and remake their military, because from what I'm hearing, in the long term, it's bad for them.
No, but I mean, you got to keep in mind that
I don't know. I'm just asking.
all of this kind. No. But think of it. All of these kinds of improvements and whatnot, this kind of research and development takes years. For this particular conflict, these improvements and this research and development, it's going to take years, half a decade.
One second update. Believe me, in 5 years, if the Russians stop this conflict today, in 5 years, with this weapon, the Russians won't be able to repeat their success. Won't be able.
Well, be that as it may, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I can get on board with that logic, because you're basically assuming that the Russians aren't going to make advances of their own, and they have. And the fact that they have hypersonic missiles with technology that they've clearly shared with the Chinese, that the Americans cannot counter, which has turned their aircraft carriers into sitting ducks. I'm not sure, because your thinking presupposes that the Russians are going to stand still, and they're clearly
No,
not standing
yes,
still. in
I'm
weapons
saying that
development.
they need to develop, and they
They
need to
are
now they
developing.
need, yes, and need to upgrade everything and to change everything,
Well,
because
okay, it's a okay, but looking at the here and now of this particular conflict, because we've been discussing this for about 2 hours, and it's been a far-ranging conversation. It's a lot of fun, but I want to get to some solid conclusions that we would all be on board with. And the first conclusion that I really want to say is that I think that we're all in agreement that there is no viable military victory for the Ukraine side. Is this an
agree.
accurate assessment?
Yes,
Do
Yeah.
we all agree?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
yes,
Okay. And the next solid conclusion is that everything that the Russians have so far captured, insofar as ground is concerned, they're going to keep it permanently, and it will become part of the Russian Federation. I don't think anybody disputes this, but I further believe that at this time the Russians intend to capture Kharkov and capture Odessa and probably capture Dnipropetrovsk formerly, and perhaps in the future. Do we all agree with this?
and Poltava, that lies between Kharkiv and Zaporozhye. There is a small town
Yeah.
in the middle of Ukraine.
Yeah,
Yes,
I've been
agree.
to Poltava. It's a lovely town, by the way. It's definitely worth visiting. But it's kind of like ethnic Ukrainian. I'm never sure if they'd go for it, but let's just pause it. Do we all agree that these are the objectives? All of the territory that they currently hold, plus Kharkov, plus Odessa, plus Dnipro and Poltava, for sure. Do we all agree with this is the objective of the Russians at this time?
In the perfect scenario, yeah. For them,
it's
perfect
the most
scenario for
likely-
Russia.
It's the most likely scenario, but the West has forced that by, say, giving Harpoon anti-ship missiles to
Yeah.
the Kiev regime in Odessa. I don't think the Kremlin wanted that to start this, but that's where they're being forced to, and it's hard to. I think the Russian people will be very hard to accept anything less than that at this point.
Yeah, as a political matter, the Kremlin, the Putin and the people around him at the Kremlin, it would be viewed as a political failure and would certainly hurt them badly if they did not take Odessa, for one, and probably Kharkov as well. Okay, so we're all more or less in agreement. Mark, you think that this is going to be a forever war in Western Ukraine? Is that your thinking at this time?
Yeah. It's been my thinking from day one, and it hasn't changed. It's only gone more in that direction. I mean, it could be a frozen conflict. It could be like Transnistria, right?
Mhm.
But no. I mean, you do not put Ukraine back together after this. No.
Okay. My thinking is, and I'll throw this out there, this has been my thinking for a while now, that the Russians will certainly capture eastern and southern Ukraine and annex it permanently. And they will create a rump Ukraine state in what is now central Ukraine with the capital of Kiev. Kiev economically, by the way, is kind of pretty much useless because the main moneymakers are South Ukraine and East Ukraine. Central Ukraine and certainly Western Ukraine, they're just a money suck. And so it seems that central Ukraine will be a rump state with some sort of puppet regime. And I've always thought that the Russians, if they were clever, they would allow Poland to take Western Ukraine and turn Western Ukraine into Poland's Vietnam, stir up trouble there. Because Mark, I kind of agree with you that the neo-Nazi, ethnic Ukraine centered in Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk are always going to be a problem. And I've always thought that if Russia gave up that bit of Western Ukraine to the Poles, Galicia, to the Poles, and deliberately, of course, in terms of subterfuge, though, stirred up trouble in Poland, it would be that forever war, but it would be Poland's problem, not Russia.
This is similar to Dima's scenario, or in a way.
Among 3 Ukrainians, 2 are bosses and 1 is a traitor.
I think it's perfectly possible that Polish troops will move into West Ukraine, but I do not believe it is politically possible for Poland as a member of NATO to annex. They may have de facto suzerainty over a future rump West Ukrainian state, but I do not believe that you will see Poland, annex Western Ukraine, Galicia annexed by Poland. I think that is kind of a fantasy of Russian.
What's his name? Of Janusz Kaczynski. He lusts after that land. Yeah,
that's not going to happen.
But suppose this notion, and I'm just spitballing here. Suppose everything west of the Dnieper, right, is basically, the Kiev regime has installed a puppet regime, and it's divided between East and West Ukraine. And West Ukraine basically becomes a hotbed of Ukrainian nationalism, and the Russians foment terrorism and trouble in Western Ukraine. Then all of a sudden that forever war becomes contained to this Western portion. The Eastern Ukraine rump state that remains will be denounced by the West as a puppet regime of Russia, which is essentially it would be. And all the trouble, the headache would be confined to this Western Ukraine state, which would be a hotbed of banderistas and right sector crazies and all the rest of them. And it would be basically Europe's problem. Do you see what I mean? Wouldn't that be like the best solution from the point of view of the Russians? Who I'm saying it the best solution for the Russians because at this time we all agree that Russia is the one with its hand on the handle of this whole situation.
The West has supported West Ukrainian nationalism since the 1950s.
Since Stalin.
Since the 1950s. They attempted to launch an insurrection led by the CIA in West Ukraine against the Soviet Union in the 1950s, right? But you're going to see instability there, but the West will continue to use that hatred as an offensive weapon. Rather, the potential for terrorism, sabotage, partisan warfare will be the other way around. The West will use that against Eastern Ukraine and Russia, where it'll be very easy to infiltrate those people, right? In relative terms there. So it will be kind of yes, but the opposite way around.
The Eastern rump Ukraine state would be a hotbed of terrorism and trouble.
Yes.
Dima, Alex, what do you guys think of the future?
That yesterday there was a very interesting meeting in Poland, and in Poland there was a lot of opposite forces to the real power in Belarus. And yesterday in Poland, they created a government abroad of Belarus. So I suppose that Poland has some plans for the west part of Ukraine, and furthermore, they have some plans for the Belarus as well.
Oh, I missed that. Could you elaborate, please?
Yes, that there was elections in 2020 in Belarus, and after that elections, a lot of people were forced to leave Belarus. And it's not like it's hundreds of thousands of people left because of they broke the local law. It's like local law is very tough, but they broke it. And all the opponents of the real president of Belarus, they left Belarus. And yesterday there was a very big meeting in Poland. And of course, under the Poland view and the US view, they started the process of creation of the government abroad, as we saw something in
government in exile. A government in exile.
If you remember, during the Second World War, when the Germans captured Poland, they created the same thing in London. So they created the same thing in Poland, some center, and they will try to elect like the prime minister of this government exit, and I'm sure that Poland and the West countries are going to recognize them. So, and that's mean that they have some views on the west side of Belarus, and of course on Ukraine as well.
Gonzalo, can I pitch a TV show to you?
Sure.
All right. So here it's the year 2028, and Juan Guaido, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and Volodymyr Zelensky share an apartment in Brooklyn together. They're all roommates pretending to be leaders of countries.
Yes.
and they order around non-existent armies on non-existent offensives, that kind of thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm. They all have friends who are the shadow Secretary of State and the shadow this.
Okay,
and
well,
that.
Mark, I'll tell you right now, I buy your pitch, but you're neglecting a love interest. Why don't I throw in like Victoria Nuland is like having like a menage a trois or menage a quatre with these three leaders, you know?
She's the producer of the show.
Oh,
she's the showrunner. She's the showrunner.
I need a love interest. No, Mark, you're not with the program if there's no love interest, especially, something interesting, same sex, maybe. Maybe we could get, I don't know, Petro Poroshenko as the love interest. There we'd have something interesting.
Who's the current president of the separatists in Taiwan?
Okay, so this is absurd. I mean, it's absurd, the notion that they're creating governments in exile, but then at the same time, it's absurd if they don't have any power. But they do have power. They do have power to change the course of events and potentially install these literal puppet regimes that have been manufactured by the West.
But if everything is in Poland, it can't be targeted by the Russians at the same time. So maybe that's why they're doing it.
Well, yeah, obviously. They can create this fictitious little government and have it ready to install the second the government falls. I have to go back to my point. I think that Zelensky's days are numbered. I'd be very, very surprised if he survives this and winds up in Miami or in his house in Miami or apartment in Miami or Tel Aviv or Italy or wherever other place he's got property. I don't think that he's going to be able to get out of this alive, to tell you the truth.
Gonzalo, you need to clear your phone before the Kharkiv blockade.
Oh, I tried to tell him.
Phone, please.
I tried to tell him this.
We will miss you if something happens. Please clear your phone.
No, I mean, like, look, to tell you the truth, let's not talk about it here. But the fact is that it's been a very interesting conversation. And we should wind it down. I don't want to be pressing the luck of my audience. I care more about the audience's interest than anybody else's, to tell you the truth. So before we get going, I want to leave you each with an opportunity for final words before we go. I'll start first to give you guys the opportunity to think of a final word you want to leave the audience with. My own final word or final thoughts on this whole conflict is that it's a complete disaster. It only hurts the Ukrainian nation and the people of Europe, because all these sanctions and all the hysteria over this situation, hysteria that was wound up by the Americans, well, it's going to lead the Europeans to be cold and hungry and dark come winter, and for nothing, for no reason whatsoever. I think this is a complete disaster. I think, too, that the United States is pushing for this disaster in Europe, in Ukraine, because the American leadership, they do not know how to raise up their country, and so they find it easier to maintain their power to pull down everybody else. And I think that is the basic goal of the American regime. I so despise them. You have no idea how much I despise all these people in the United States who lead the United States, because I have very fond memories of the United States. I think it was once a great nation with a great people, but it's been hollowed out and destroyed by the people in leadership in the West. And they are doing that now to Europe and to Ukraine and throwing away lives for nothing. And it so angers me. And the only thing I hope for is that this conflict ends quickly, and that somebody responsible who actually cares about the Ukraine people is in charge of the situation and is able to reestablish some order and some peace. That's my final thought. Who wants to go next?
I hope that this conflict is going to end before we finish this stream.
Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. No. Mark, Alex, you guys want to have something to say before we go?
Mark, go ahead.
Okay, just bigger picture geopolitics, right? Everything we're seeing here, we're going to see replicated in some parallel form fashion in China, in Taiwan, in the next 5 to 10 year window. This is the great decoupling between the West and, you want to call it the rest, certainly the Chinese, Russian, Iranian bloc. And it is the end. The unipolar world is over, but it is not the birth of a multipolar world. The multipolar world is being stillborn because the West is trying to force every country to take sides with their threats of sanctions and economic isolation, cutting off from SWIFT, this economic warfare. We're seeing the rebirth of a bipolar world order just a few decades after the first one started. The globalization as we known it is over. We're going to see smaller regional trading blocks. The golden age of the internet as we know it is over. The internet is going to increasingly fracture. We already seen this happen with airspace, physical travel, trade routes. We're looking at a more fractured, globalized world, bipolar world moving forward. This is the great decoupling.
I agree. Completely agree.
And from my perspective, one thing is that perhaps the Western media always says that the Russians are losing and everything. But what I see in the big picture is that a lot of countries in the world, especially third world countries, see the Russian intervention as something they could replicate, because they're like, oh, it's the first time in a long time that a neighbor takes 25% of the land of the other neighbor on the other side. So a lot of countries that have sort of disputes might be looking at it and be like, oh, this could be a good idea. And this is what I fear. A lot of countries could be prepping up something.
Yeah, because the long peace has sort of like kept everybody in line. But now all of a sudden, old grudges and old desires are cropping up. Yes, I would agree.
And there's a possibility to do it, because back in the days, maybe people didn't see, but now they're like, oh, it's possible.
Well, also what's interesting, I hate to expand, I hate to draw this out, but it's a really interesting point, is that, see, a lot of other countries that have these little disputes, they'll realize, oh, everybody's focusing on Ukraine or China, Taiwan, what have you. So we might be able to get away with it and nobody bothers us.
Azerbaijan is a good example.
Azerbaijan, yeah. So, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. Chat, I hope that you enjoyed the show. Chat, why don't you hit me with a +1 if you enjoyed the show and a 0 if you thought it sucked. I'm guessing that the nearly 5,000 people here who are watching it have been enjoying it. I hope you have. I certainly have been enjoying this tremendously. I want to thank my guests, Alex, Dima, and Mark. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. You guys, stick around a little bit before I end the broadcast just to say a personal thank you. And chat, thank you as always. Yeah, so everybody seems to have enjoyed it. That's great to hear. Great to see. Yeah, chat, thank you so much for being here. And I will catch you next time. Oh, by the way, on Thursday, in the Roundtable, I'm having Kim Iverson on and some other guests as well that I'm ironing out that issue. And I think Maria Dubivoka is coming back. Maria, if I screwed up your name, I'm so sorry. I always screwed it up. She's a lovely woman, and she was on before. I think she'll be on Thursday. Kim Iverson for sure is on Thursday. So check out the Roundtable then. Take it easy, y'all.